Okay, can I call on the doctor? Dr. Yaseen Khan, are you able to jump on with me?
I'm right here, Lo.
Brilliant, guys. We're so privileged to have Yaseen with us today. He's one of the co-founders of a company called Guidance that's been making a lot of waves in the medical technology industry of late. We've asked him to just share some of his doctor's notes on how to raise finance for a scale-up company. They've raised a couple of interesting rounds over the years, and Yaseen has amazing insights into that process. So, Yaseen, we're in your hands. We'd just love to hear kind of how you guys think about approaching fundraising. How do you get to investors? How do you prep? How do you think about that process? And how do you guys do it? Over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. I'm not quite sure if you can call me a doctor at this stage. I've been kind of 8 years out of it. I'm hoping that I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm a good entrepreneur and a bad doctor. Somewhere about 4 years ago, I was equally bad at both. And very useless, like, to both worlds. So I hope I'm kind of moving along and becoming a better businessman now. But I look, thanks to everyone. Really, very much of a pleasure to talk to everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself and Guidance's history with the lens of our kind of fundraising and how we've capitalized the business up to now. And then I'm really going to hone into a couple of key lessons that we undertook and that I'd like to share. And they were sort of each they were dotted very much on our journey all the way up to now. So it's really in that spirit that I'm going to be talking to you. I mean, I must acknowledge that with these things, one is not it's important to kind of qualify the position that one talks from. Guidance is a company, and as you know well, Lo, we've grown Guidance in South Africa. It's a leading medtech health tech startup in South Africa. We've recently expanded into the region, and we're commercially contracting throughout the sub-Saharan African region. We certainly kind of haven't progressed to the point where we've raised a $10-20 million Series A globally as yet, but we've raised over several rounds, both kind of angel seed as well as institutional funding. We've raised several millions of rands. In my time before Guidance, I raised money in a non-profit capacity as well. So really, from that perspective, there have been a good couple of lessons. So I'm going to dive in. Basically in the very early days, before founding Guidance, I was, of course, a medical doctor. I was an emergency room doctor. And I think what's important to qualify is that, and this is probably true for any other professional coming in and becoming an entrepreneur and raising funds, the skill set that one has as a doctor is very different to the skill set of an entrepreneur. I think they're probably completely like antithetical, like they kind of conflict with each other. Like, doctors are extreme perfectionists often. They don't delegate very well. And I'm sure those of you that know doctors, they generally don't make good business people. I think they make money by virtue of the good service they offer. So there was a lot of unlearning that I had to do in moving into the space. And one sort of has to sort of calibrate what the learning is and how the aptitude one has to have in raising money. The best example that I can give is like the burden of proof for making a diagnosis is not the same burden of proof that you need when you kind of talking about the market size of your business. There's a different burden of proof in that, and you've sort of got to understand that when you go to the kind of fundraising interface and engaging fundraising. So if I boil it back way back down to the start of our story, when we had initially developed we ran a non-profit for 3-4 years in the mobile m-health space, and I was involved in a number of projects where we were dealing with little mobile applications that we built in partnership with healthcare institutions, really with the aim of capacitating healthcare professional decision making. And then my colleague and I decided to spin out one of the applications and get into the for-profit space and build what is really a healthcare platform that ultimately does something very simple. It provides a leading medicine support service to healthcare professionals. And it's got to do with medicines information, digital tools, and a number of means to support prescribing. But our business model really involves working with the big multinational pharma industry. And we really are the leading customer engagement platform for the multinational pharma industry in South Africa and more so in Southern Africa right now. But in the very beginning, lesson one, I would say, when we went out and raised our first funds, the first thing that we did was we understood that we didn't know very much about the language of fundraising. I think that was something that stood with me in the very beginning. And I think that when in the first couple of investment meetings that I had, as founders do, you do several of these things. The first couple of meetings, I spoke a lot about the problem and I spoke a lot about the solution we were intending to build. I think we really took off and we raised a good amount of money in our very early stage, probably more so than kind of most of the colleagues that we had in the space at that point in time. And I think one key reason for it is that we brought on quite sophisticated corporate finance support very, very, very early on. We actually partnered with who are still partners and kind of long-term supporters of the business right now, but the guys at BDO in Cape Town, who had a lot of foresight to kind of assist us in the very beginning. And what we did was, one of the things I, as a founder, never really understood in the beginning was you can talk a lot about the problem and you can talk a lot about the market, but the language of return is something else. Like how do you really talk about how much an investor is going to make from this investment? And it really boils down to the numbers. And you do your best to postulate financial projections, and you talk about the market, and you talk about the revenue projections. But I think with like proper corporate finance support, we could give some level of like detailed confidence on, look, you put in so much money. This is the current share price now. This is likely what's going to happen at the next round. There's going to be so many shares in issue. The next investors are probably going to invest at X. Your share price is going to go from like A to B. And we can talk about the assumptions around that, but that picture, like really honing into that, and I don't see a lot of other founders like talk a lot about that to investors. The truth is, in the very early stage, a lot of that is probably hogwash. But I think like what I uncovered was that like investors really like that part of things, and if you as the founder CEO, you're not talking about that, then I think like something is missing. That they feel like your head is not enough in the money and the finances. So that was like a really important lesson, just proper corporate finance sophistication, and like me as a founder and CEO, kind of wrapping my head around that properly. That was the first sort of real hard lesson. And then the second lesson, I think, was that this question about when you're in your very early days, I think one would be surprised by the amount of angel and very early seed capital available among what are moderately high net worth individuals in your space, or who understand what you're trying to do. And that money could go, in South African terms, could go into the several millions of rands as it did with us. So with us, what did we do? We approached ex-pharmaceutical C-suite individuals. We approached medical specialist colleagues. And we had coffee with them, and we told them what we're doing, and they understood what we were doing. And the cycle for landing investment was very quick. And there was obviously a lot of trust at play, but ultimately it was super fast, and it allowed us to get going very quickly and build product very quickly. And I still see a lot of founders in a very early stage, going for institutional capital, which like has its, it certainly has its drawbacks in that very early stage. And certainly from a timing perspective, takes arguably 6 months to a year. So that was sort of the second lesson, like really honing in and engaging with proper like high net worth individuals who understand what you're doing, and find them. And we were quite like we did it quite broadly. We weren't too worried about having quite a few of them on our cap table in the very early phase, because we did the maths and we said, well, if we can get like, a bar two out of like, several people, 5, 10 people, like we could, put in a lot of money very quickly and get going. And so we did that, and that worked, and that really worked as well because we had kind of the sophisticated corporate finance support at the table. So that sort of mix worked. Then, if I fast forward a little bit, I think that this question about the low, I'm also just doing a time check if I'm good for time.
Perfect, Yaseen. We can do another minute or two. You started late, so you can take the 2 minutes if you need it, Yaseen.
Perfect. So I'll end up with a kind of little analogy that we use internally, which kind of speaks to when we eventually progressed. And what we did was we progressed. So we've done 5 rounds of fundraising now with this latest round. We started very small 6 years ago. We eventually got the business, and we to become self-sustainable on revenues. And now this latest round, we're raising expansion capital to expand the business outside of South Africa. So that we've done that trajectory from like very small kind of angel level investment all the way to institutional capital. And the story that I like to leave with you with institutional capital is, this is not much of a Q&A, but it's an interesting thing to reflect on. Which animal in the African savanna has the highest hunting hit rate, highest success rate when it comes to hunting? And I often ask these people this question, and people often say, well, it's the lion, it's a fish eagle or whatever. And it's funny, it's the African wild dog. And I use this story very particularly because it actually applies not only to our fundraising, but to our B2B sales. What's very interesting about the tactics that the African wild dog uses is that, so they do a few things, right? So firstly, if a pack of wild dogs are hunting a herd of giraffe, the first thing they do is they pick one, and they only go for that one, and they kind of pick the one that they're likely to take down. They separate it from the herd, and then they chase it. That's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is they just chase it for a ridiculously long while. They chomp at its heels, and they keep on going, and they make sure they have the endurance to kind of keep going and getting at it. And eventually they tire the thing out, and then the thing collapses. And then they do something. The third thing they do is, as soon as the thing collapses, they devour it like almost instantaneously before any hyenas or any other predator has a chance to take it down. And I reflected on that because the key thing is that when it comes to institutional fundraising, I think your pre-planning and your strategy as to how you're going to do this and the tactics that you deploy are so important because they suck up like all of your time. And so if I think about institutional funders and I think about the way wild dogs do this, firstly, the grading and the selection of who you're actually going to go for, and not going to speak to kind of every last institution under the sun. You go for the ones you're going to win, because once you're there, you're investing your time, and that's it. The second thing is be prepared for endurance. Like, no matter what they tell you, you're not closing the deal in 3 months. Everyone says that, first meeting to disbursement in 3 months. I've never experienced that. I'm not sure if any of you have. So have enough cash in your bank, know what your plan is, don't fall off a cliff like it's going to absolutely tire you out. And then lastly, when they bite, like, and when you actually sign the deal, like, race through like the legals and the contracting, and just like do the DD, be fully prepared for the DD. If that stuff, that last part, if that part protracts, like, somebody else is gonna come and take your money. So that was kind of my last analogy. I hope that kind of rings a bell with some of you. But thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Loa. I hope I've respected the time.
No, that's perfect, Yaseen. Thank you so much for those insights, and I love that analogy. Definitely going to use that as well. It's so clever, really cool. Thank you for sharing your learnings with us. I'm sure there's a ton of golden nuggets everyone can take away on their own fundraising journey. So thanks for that.
Thanks.